Who will finish what was left unfinished, when the one who began it is dead, and the ones who remain only laugh? The wind whistled down the corridors of Harvard like a tired old man sighing through cracked teeth. Outside the high windows, the trees stood bare and brittle, their branches like bones against the February sky. But inside the mathematics building, under the soft hum of yellow lights, a woman pushed her cleaning cart slowly down the hallway. The wheels turned with a sound that was barely there, just enough to remind the world that someone was still awake, still working while the rest slept beneath towers of knowledge. Her name was Isabella Green. She wore a brown coat faded with time, hanging to her knees. The elbows were worn soft, the lining frayed. Her hair was pulled back in a low bun, a few strands falling loose over her temple. Her shoes made no sound, not because they were silent, but because she had learned how to walk like air. Room G302. She came here every night. It wasn't a busy room. It was reserved for advanced research seminars, the sort of meetings where white-haired professors and selected graduate students argued over things no one else could understand. And on the blackboard, there was always something left behind, chalk marks like fossil trails of thoughts too heavy to carry home. Tonight, something held her. There it was again, untouched for 2 weeks now. The same question scrawled in fading white chalk. A sequence of definitions, 3 lines of assumptions, and a question mark at the end. She didn't go closer. She didn't need to. The question had lived in her mind since the first night she saw it. She stood still. Her heart didn't race. It thudded slow and deep like a bell far away. Images returned. Half-faded memories of library nights at the University of Kansas, notes scribbled on grocery receipts, chalk dust on her fingers even years after she left her last class. She might have stood there for 1 minute, maybe 10. And then the door opened. A tall student with headphones stepped in. He blinked when he saw her standing by the board. His eyes dropped to the mop beside her, then back to her face. "What are you doing here?" he asked, part surprised, part amused. "Just looking," Isabella said softly. He smirked, pulled out one earbud. "That's functional analysis. You know, graduate-level math. Even our professor can't solve that thing." "Is that so?" she answered. She bent to continue cleaning the lower part of the board, careful not to wipe the question. Before she left the room, she looked once more at the symbols. Not with curiosity, but with something deeper. The kind of look people give to someone they once loved deeply, and still do. She left. The door closed behind her. The student forgot about her as soon as she was gone, but on the 3rd floor of the mathematics building, in a quiet control room, a monitor flickered in silence. A grainy black and white image showed the janitor woman standing alone, facing the blackboard under the humming fluorescent lights. The night security guard never watched that feed. But if he had rewound the tape from the week before, and the week before that, he would have seen the same woman, same time, same room. She came every night. And every night when her cleaning was done, she stood in front of that board. Sometimes for seconds, sometimes for minutes. And every night, her eyes, those quiet, remembering eyes, searched the symbols like someone reading a love letter sent long ago, never answered. Because some people are never invited into the classroom, but they still hear the lecture with their hearts. She returned to the supply closet, washed her hands. On the inside of her locker door was a small taped photo of a teenage girl in a school uniform, smiling wide. Her daughter, Emily. She touched the photo with her fingertips, then turned out the light. Outside, the Boston air was sharp, and the ground was hard. She wrapped her scarf tighter, walking past the old lamp posts of Harvard Yard. But in her coat pocket was a scrap of paper pulled from last night's trash bin. Someone's thrown away notes on a half-finished theorem. She had added one line to it. Just one line. But it was enough to bring a light to her eyes, the same kind that once lit up her face in the university library years ago. Because when a heart still lives for something, it never goes entirely quiet. At Harvard, everyone comes with a resume. She came with a daughter and a mop. Isabella Green didn't always clean floors. Once, long ago, she sat in a quiet lecture hall herself, in the back row, taking notes with a hand-me-down pen and second-hand textbooks. That was in Kansas, in a place that didn't have brick towers or secret societies, just prairie winds and a small university library that smelled like old wood and ambition. Back then, she was just Izzy, the quiet girl who asked too many questions and solved problems in ways that confused even her professors. She didn't dress like the others. She didn't party. She didn't own a laptop. But her mind, her professors used to say, was like a lens that bent light in ways they didn't expect. She could see paths in problems that others missed. By her third year, she was already helping her analysis professor revise lecture notes. There was talk of graduate school, a fellowship in Chicago, even whispers of Europe. But that was before her father collapsed one afternoon in the barn. Before the hospital bills arrived, thicker than textbooks. Before her mother's stroke. And before she had to leave Kansas, not to follow a dream, but to keep her family from losing the farm they had already almost lost. She never officially dropped out. She just stopped going. At first, she told herself it would be 1 semester, then 2. Then years passed, and suddenly she was 36, living in a low-income unit in Roxbury, Massachusetts, with her daughter, Emily, and a stack of old math notebooks in a cardboard box under the bed. She worked where she could. Waitress, daycare, cleaner, house-sitter. Nothing lasted long. Everything paid just enough to stay hungry and hopeful. Emily grew. She was bright, too, sharp as broken glass and just as fragile. Isabella kept her close, read to her every night, taught her algebra when she was 10, gave her first taste of calculus when she turned 12. But books weren't enough. Emily needed clothes, meals, a future. So Isabella took a night job at Harvard, not as a student, not as faculty, but as a custodian. They didn't ask about degrees, just whether she could lift 40 pounds and handle chemicals without complaining. She said yes. At first, the job felt like humiliation wrapped in a paycheck. Walking past students carrying the same books she once loved, hearing bits of lectures through doors she couldn't open, it cut deep. But over time, the sting dulled. Pain has a way of settling like dust, and she learned to move like silence itself. Nobody looked at her long. Nobody asked her name. She wore a name tag, but no one read it. She cleaned chalk dust, dumped bins, vacuumed carpets, wiped whiteboards. She found scribbled notes tossed in trash cans, diagrams, equations, problem sets, and kept the ones she liked. Some she studied. Some she understood. Some she pinned to her closet wall like art. She began to collect them like others might collect postcards from places they could never afford to visit. By the 3rd month, she had memorized which classrooms held what kinds of minds. The neuro lab had scrawled formulas about memory transfer. The architecture studio had blueprints and scale ratios. But the mathematics wing, that was different. It was quiet there, always, as if the ideas themselves didn't like being overheard. She came to love the way the blackboards looked just before they were erased, half-solved mysteries, diagrams fading like dying stars. And one night, she found the question. She didn't know whose hand had written it. The symbols were strange, but not unfamiliar. Like a language she once spoke fluently but hadn't used in years. She stood there for a while, then longer. A janitor staring at a chalkboard isn't a crime. No one stopped her. So she kept coming back. During the day, she was invisible. At night, she became something else. She began copying the question onto napkins during her lunch breaks. She found a used math textbook at Goodwill for $2, wrote notes in the margins, underlined definitions about bounded linear operators, continuous functionals, abstract normed spaces. It was slow. Her memory had faded. The math was rusted over like an old gate. But night by night, line by line, it returned. In her closet at home, she kept a secret notebook. It was small, leather-bound, stained from coffee and time. Inside were equations, arrows, diagrams. Her handwriting was neat, steady, as if she wrote not for others, but for the universe itself. She never showed it to anyone, not even Emily. She didn't need a classroom to learn. She didn't need a title to solve. All she needed was a question worth staying awake for. One night, as she was sweeping the hallway outside room G302, she overheard a conversation through the door. A lecture was wrapping up. A voice, older, refined, was saying, "Of course, no one's been able to complete Hale's conjecture, not since 2005. We don't even know if it's provable without more assumptions." Another voice, "I thought someone tried in 2012? "Yes, and failed. The logic collapsed in step 6. Hale died before he could formalize the last part. The whole thing's a ghost of a proof." Isabella paused, broom still in hand. Ghost of a proof. She didn't know the name Hale, not really, but she knew the shape of that question on the board. And she didn't think it was a ghost. Not anymore. That night, after she'd cleaned the lecture hall, she stayed a little longer. She stood in front of the board, holding a piece of chalk. Her hands were dry from soap. Her back ached. She didn't write anything. Not yet. She just stood there, thinking. And in her mind, the pieces began to shift. At home that weekend, she didn't rest. Emily asked if they could go out. Isabella smiled softly and said they'd go next week. But inside, she was filling pages, not with guesses, with steps, clear, logical, beautiful even. She wasn't solving the problem because she wanted recognition. She didn't even believe anyone would read what she wrote. She was doing it for the same reason people keep old photos in wallets long after the people in them are gone. Because some things are worth keeping close. Because some things, once loved, never stop living inside you. And in the quiet of those nights, in the glow of fluorescent lights and chalk dust, Isabella Green, the woman with no credentials, was writing her way back into the world that had once left her behind. Not for applause, but for peace. Some problems aren't solved because they're too hard. Some because the right person never got the chance. The question hadn't moved in 20 years. Not forward, not back. It sat like a stone in the riverbed of mathematics, unshifting, worn around the edges, and quietly feared by those who still remembered how heavy it truly was. Hale-Thompson conjecture, they called it. A problem that outlived the man who first dared to pose it. Edward Hale had once been a star, brilliant, unrelenting, and so far ahead of his peers that even his closest colleagues struggled to follow him. He taught at Harvard for 29 years, pacing like a wolf during lectures, throwing chalk into trash cans when an idea failed to land clean. His students said he could reduce the most complex argument to dust with a single raised eyebrow. But for all his sharpness, there was one thing he never solved. The question he couldn't finish. A gap in logic, a crack in the bridge between assumption and conclusion. Some say it haunted him. Others said he relished it, the way a mountain relishes not being climbed. Then, in the spring of 2005, Professor Hale died. No heirs, no protégés, just a blackboard full of unanswered questions and a single line circled in red. Find the map, if it exists. After his death, scholars tried. For years, seminars around the world whispered the conjecture like a myth. The question centered on bounded linear operators between infinite-dimensional Banach spaces, abstract objects where the usual rules of geometry don't quite hold. The conjecture asked whether a certain kind of transformation could exist between two such spaces, maintaining weak continuity under subtle constraints. To most people, it meant nothing. But to those who understood, it meant everything. It was a bridge, invisible but possibly real, between two continents of thought that had never been connected. And if someone could build it, the consequences would ripple through analysis, quantum physics, and even the foundations of data compression. But no one could do it. Some claimed it couldn't be done at all. That Hale had asked the wrong question. That the gap in his proof wasn't a step, it was a cliff. By 2010, most had moved on. By 2015, it was forgotten. An old chalk ghost haunting room G302. But not by Isabella. She didn't know Hale, never heard of the conjecture before she came to Harvard. But she knew the feel of a question that mattered. There's a weight to an unsolved problem. A certain gravity. It draws you in slowly, quietly, until you realize it has your whole heart wrapped around a single symbol. And she felt it the first time she saw that board. It had been scribbled half-heartedly, a remnant from a graduate seminar no one bothered to erase. Just 3 lines of assumptions, 1 operator symbol, and a question mark. But to Isabella, it felt alive, as if someone had whispered across time, "Please, just try." So she did. She didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell. By day, she cleaned kitchens and bought groceries. She patched holes in Emily's backpack with fishing line. She paid rent on time and kept the heat low to save money. By night, she solved, slowly, carefully. She began with textbooks from the city library, then old PDF papers printed at the community center. She wrote her own notes, recreated diagrams from memory. She pulled apart the assumptions one by one. She found that the conjecture didn't hinge on the map itself, but on the properties of a certain dual space that Hale had never fully defined. That was the flaw. Not a hole in logic, but an undefined edge, like a shadow drawn without the hand that cast it. And in her head, she saw a new way to build it. Not through brute proof, but through compact approximation. A method she'd learned in her 3rd year of undergrad, forgotten by many, but unforgettable to her. One night, she overheard a graduate seminar through the cracked door of room G302. They were discussing Hale again. "People still talk about it?" she asked herself, surprised. A professor was saying, the problem was never the transformation itself. It was proving its existence without assuming separability. Someone else laughed. That's like asking someone to jump off a cliff and survive without wings. And Isabella, sweeping the hallway just beyond the doorway, paused. Because in her notebook at home, she had begun building wings. Quietly, carefully, out of nothing but chalk and memory. That night, when she came home, she pulled the notebook from the closet and opened it on the floor beside her bed. She didn't have a desk. She worked on the carpet, under a flickering bulb. Emily was already asleep in the next room, and Isabella, hunched over on tired knees, began writing again. It wasn't easy. She hit dead ends, redrew diagrams, tore out pages. Sometimes she stayed up until 4 a.m., her mind burning, her body aching. But something in her had been awakened. Not ambition, not pride, just the simple, sacred need to know. By the end of February, she had constructed a sketch of the proof. It was still rough, but the logic was there, laid out like stones across a river. If she was right, then the existence of the operator didn't depend on the compactness of the full space, but on a nested sequence of functionals that could approximate weak continuity under limit conditions. It was strange, elegant, different, but most of all, it was hers. She wanted to show someone. She didn't, not yet. And still, every night she returned to that classroom. Sometimes she stood before the board and simply stared. Sometimes she added a single line. Other times, nothing. She wasn't trying to prove anything to Harvard. She was trying to speak to Hale, to the question, to the part of her that once belonged in classrooms and never really left. 20 years after a man died with a chalk stub in his hand, a woman with cleaning gloves was writing the answer, line by line, on the board he left behind. Not because anyone asked her to, not because she hoped to be noticed, but because some questions deserve to be finished. And some minds, no matter where life sends them, never stop solving. Some handwriting doesn't need a name. You know it by the way it dares to continue. At first, they thought it was a prank. One morning, the teaching assistant for advanced functional analysis arrived early to prep the classroom. He paused halfway through setting up his slides when he noticed something odd on the blackboard. Someone had added to the conjecture, not just scribbles or symbols, no childish doodles. This was real math. A short line of logic had been scrawled underneath the known assumptions, clean, sharp, consistent with the original notation. The handwriting was neat, tilted slightly to the right. Letters that curled just enough to suggest someone used to writing by hand, not keyboard. A rare thing these days. He stared at it for a moment, puzzled. Then he erased it. He didn't ask around, just assumed some overeager grad student had gotten bold with chalk and too much time. No one claimed it, so he cleaned it and moved on. The next week it happened again. Same spot. New line. Not a full solution, but a step. Logical. Precise. It didn't contradict the previous material. It extended it. Smoothly. Confidently. The TA stood there longer this time. His fingers hovered near the chalkboard as if he could feel heat coming off the letters. He took a picture with his phone before wiping it clean. This time he asked his students, "Did anyone write on the board after last week's class?" They all shook their heads. Some laughed. Why would we bother with Hale's dead ghost problem? He didn't push it, just nodded. But that night, he looked at the picture again, zoomed in. There was something strange about the writing. Not just the math, though that was impressive. It was the tone. It didn't read like a student. It didn't meander or try to impress. It didn't hedge. It knew. Over the next month, the writing kept coming. Just a line or two at a time. Always added at night. Always vanished by morning. Each time, the logic grew bolder. Each time, the TA stared longer. And he wasn't the only one. Soon, other instructors began noticing strange additions to the board. Lines that hadn't been there the day before, yet fit perfectly into the arc of the proof, like brushstrokes from the same unseen hand. Someone was continuing Hale's work, and doing it well. Whispers started. At first, half jokes in the break room. Maybe Hale came back from the dead. Maybe we've got a genius ghost. Maybe it's just an AI learning chalk. But behind the jokes was tension, Because whoever was writing these additions, they were good. Too good. A postdoc from Princeton visiting for a seminar paused mid-presentation when he saw one of the anonymous lines left overnight. He squinted, then stepped closer. "Who added this?" he asked. No one answered. He stood in silence for a few seconds, then muttered, "This isn't undergrad work." And he was right. This wasn't guessing. This was mathematics with a pulse. Eventually, the department chair was notified. Emails went around. Unauthorized board use. Concern over academic integrity. A few faculty members raised concerns about a student anonymously working on the Hale-Thompson conjecture and possibly lifting ideas from elsewhere. They wanted to know who was doing it. Not because they were angry, because they were afraid that someone brilliant was solving it and they hadn't noticed. They tried to ask around quietly, graduate students, fellows, visiting scholars. No one admitted anything, because no one knew. Meanwhile, the handwriting kept returning. Sometimes it responded to a flaw spotted in a previous line. Other times, it introduced a shortcut, subtle, elegant, unnecessary to the proof, but full of style. It was like watching someone dance on the edge of a theorem. Not reckless, not showy, just free. Isabella never stayed long after she wrote. She came in like she always did, pushing her cart, checked the schedule to make sure the room was empty. Then she'd step up to the board, still wearing her janitor's gloves, and write with quiet fingers. No hesitation, no eraser. She didn't copy from notes. She didn't fumble with definitions. She just wrote, one line at a time. Each night, a little more, and then she left. She didn't think anyone would care. She assumed someone would wipe it all away. But that didn't matter. She wasn't writing for approval. She was writing for truth. One evening, as she exited the building just after 2 a.m., she passed a young man with a badge on his coat that read, "Facilities IT Intern." He was crouched near a wall outlet, pretending to fix something. He didn't look up. Neither did she. But the next day, a small, nearly invisible camera had appeared in the corner of room G302, and it was set to record from midnight until dawn, because someone had started asking the right question. Not what was being written, not why, but who. And in the quiet glow of old bulbs and silent boards, the answer was already there, left in a curve of chalk that no one else dared to draw. When you've watched enough minds, you know when one is writing from memory, not notes. Mason Clark wasn't born for Harvard, and he knew it. He didn't come from wealth or legacy, and the only thing his father ever passed down to him was the ability to fix things that shouldn't have lasted this long. His scholarship came with a warning, "Don't waste this." So Mason didn't. He worked harder than most, read twice as fast, and spoke half as much. His specialty was functional analysis, but what really fascinated him was intuition, the strange space between what we know and what we sense just before we do. By the time he was 28, he was teaching undergrads and assisting with doctoral research. He wasn't flashy. He didn't publish much. But in every room he entered, people listened, because he had a way of finding the thread no one else saw. Which is why, when someone started quietly writing pieces of the Hale-Thompson conjecture on the blackboard at night, Mason noticed not the content first, but the silence. Because real thinking, he believed, left a silence behind it. And what he saw on that chalkboard wasn't noise. It was the kind of thinking that comes from someone who has wrestled alone in the dark for years. He tried not to get too curious at first. Maybe it was a student, maybe a visiting researcher sneaking in extra hours, but it didn't feel like that. Each addition to the board was too composed. No scratch-outs, no hesitations, just smooth progress night by night. And the handwriting. It was consistent, slightly slanted, no loops, just strong, narrow strokes. The kind of writing that didn't ask permission. So Mason requested a camera. Not a big one, just a discreet, motion-triggered lens mounted in the corner of G302. He didn't tell anyone, not the department chair, not the admin staff. He wanted to watch the footage himself, quietly. 3 nights passed. Nothing. The board stayed blank, or erased. Whoever it was didn't come. Mason started to wonder if the writer had disappeared. Then, at 2:13 a.m. on the 4th night, the camera caught her. She entered like any janitor would, pushing a cart, keys at her side, gloves on. She wasn't tall, wore a coat that sagged around the shoulders. Her movements were slow, habitual. She emptied the bins, tidied the chairs, wiped the windowsill. Then, without a pause, she reached for the chalk and walked straight to the board. Mason watched the footage over and over. She didn't look around. She didn't double-check her notes. Because she had no notes. She simply raised her hand and began to write. Left to right, top to bottom, each symbol landing like it had been waiting all day to arrive. No hesitation, no corrections, no fear. Just knowledge and grace. When she finished, she stood back and read what she'd written. Then she set the chalk down as gently as if she were laying a child to sleep. And left. The next night, she returned, and did it again. Mason couldn't sleep after that. He kept thinking, who is she? He printed out a still image from the footage, took it down to maintenance, asked for a name. They shrugged. Probably Isabella. She does the night cleaning shift in this wing. That's all you know? She's quiet, keeps to herself. Good work. No complaints. He didn't know what he expected. Some trail of genius, a hidden resume. But when he finally caught her in person, it was over a trash can. He was walking out late from a lecture. She was wiping the rims of the bins with practiced care. He hesitated, then spoke. Excuse me, are you the one writing on the board in G302? She froze. Not out of guilt, but something deeper. The way someone freezes when they've been alone in a room for years and suddenly realize someone was listening. She stood slowly, turned. Why are you asking? She said. Her voice was soft, not defensive, just careful. I've been following the additions. They're remarkable. She looked down at her gloves. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't. I just want to understand. Who taught you this? She took a long time to answer, then said, almost like a confession, no one. Not really. I left school before I could finish, but I studied when I could. He stepped closer gently. Would you be willing to show me your work? Outside the board? She hesitated again, then slowly reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was part of a receipt. On the back, written in sharp pencil, was a sequence of steps. A sketch of the conjecture. But not just a sketch. It had a rhythm, a flow. Mason read it. His mouth opened, but no words came. She was using a technique he hadn't seen in years, an old method of indirect compact construction, repurposed in a way that made the proof move. He looked at her, stunned. This is yours? She nodded. I think I'm close, but I might be wrong. He shook his head. You're not wrong. You're brilliant. She didn't respond to that, just looked down again, like praise was something that didn't belong to her. Then she said, I don't need anyone to know. I'm just glad someone understands. That night, Mason didn't go home. He sat at his desk with her receipt under a lamp, tracing the steps with a pen that trembled slightly in his hand. This wasn't a ghost story anymore. This was a rescue. Someone had buried herself for years inside the walls of Harvard, and now, for the first time, someone had finally knocked. Some minds shine brightest when no one is watching, but even the stars need someone to look up. The next night, she didn't come. Mason waited, not in the classroom, but in the hallway, just beyond the glass doors. Midnight passed. 1, then 2, but no sign of Isabella. He told himself not to worry. She didn't owe him anything. Perhaps she was sick or had taken another shift. Perhaps she had simply changed her mind. And yet, it unsettled him. Because after all she had given, the quiet brilliance, the ghost-like trail of chalk on blackboard, she had never once asked for anything. No credit, no audience, no reply. He went home with her scrap of receipt folded neatly in his coat pocket, more precious than any published paper he'd read that year. The following night, she returned. She didn't look for him, didn't expect him. She entered G302 as she always did, alone, wrapped in a second-hand coat, shoulders bent slightly forward from years of cleaning the spaces between other people's dreams. She didn't notice Mason until she turned from the board, chalk still in hand. "I didn't think you'd be back," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would either," Mason replied. There was no accusation in her voice, no defense in his, only two people standing in a room where mathematics floated like dust in the light, unnoticed by the world outside. "May I see it again?" he asked. She handed him a different page this time, a sheet from a torn notebook, the paper thinned and soft around the edges from handling. The writing was smaller, tighter. Entire sequences of logic, each step numbered in pencil. She watched him read. He didn't speak for a full 5 minutes. When he did, it came as a whisper. "This is beautiful." Her eyes stayed on the floor. "I don't know if it's right," she said. "It is. You're not guessing, Isabella. You're proving. I'm only following what makes sense to me. That's what the great ones do." He asked if she would explain it to him, not to test her, but to listen. So she sat on the edge of the front desk, folding her gloves in her lap, and began to speak, softly. Not like a teacher, like someone remembering the shape of a place she hadn't visited in years. She didn't use fancy terms unless necessary. When she described weak continuity, she didn't say topological duals. She said, "It's like listening to an echo in a canyon. The sound's still there, just thinner. You don't measure the shout. You measure the space it moved through." When she mapped out her operator structure, she paused and said, "Think of it like stitching. If every piece of fabric is too wide, you need a needle that can pass through both. But the thread has to be strong and still soft." Mason smiled. No professor he'd studied under had ever made it feel that clear, or that alive. They stayed like that for an hour. Her speaking, him listening. No cameras, no notes, no lectures. Just learning. The way it was meant to be. Before she left, she turned and said something that stayed with him. "I don't know why it still matters to me. It shouldn't. I clean floors. I fold laundry. But when I look at those equations, something in me remembers who I used to be. And for a little while, I'm still her." Mason didn't sleep that night. He walked the halls of the math building long after the lights went out, his steps echoing softly. Something had changed. He wasn't just watching a miracle. He was part of it now. The next morning, he brought the pages to his office. He didn't copy them, didn't digitize. He simply read them again. Not like a professor, but like a student. He could see her logic forming its own language, one part rigorous, one part poetry. She didn't push the problem with force. She moved through it gently, like someone solving not to conquer, but to understand. Later that week, he met her again in room G302. She was already writing. No gloves this time. Her fingers chalked in white lines across the board with a steadiness he couldn't explain, like she wasn't reaching for the solution but returning to it. When she stepped back, he whispered, "Do you know what you've done?" She shook her head. "You didn't just complete Hale's conjecture, you resurrected it." She laughed softly. "I didn't mean to." "You're weeks ahead of anyone who's tried in 20 years. Isabella shrugged. "I guess. I just stayed with it longer." He asked if he could present it, officially. She paused. "You mean put my name on it?" "Yes." "I don't need that. You deserve it." She looked away. "I don't think it matters. I'm nobody here." Mason's voice steadied. "To them, maybe, but not to me, and not to the people who care about truth." For a moment she said nothing. Then she asked, "Would it still count if the person who solved it never finished school?" He nodded. "More than ever." She smiled, barely, but it was the kind of smile that comes after a long winter. Small, quiet, honest. That night, Mason went home and opened a new document on his computer. He titled it simply, "A Proof on the Existence of Weakly Continuous Mappings in Non-Separable Banach Spaces, Green, I." And below it he wrote the words, "In collaboration with Isabella Green, Night Custodian, Harvard University." Sometimes the gatekeepers don't fear what's wrong. They fear what didn't come through the gate. It started with a knock. Mason stood outside the office of Professor Gerald Whitcomb, department chair, full tenured, 40 years deep into Harvard tradition. Whitcomb had written 3 textbooks, chaired 2 committees on tenure policy, and hadn't personally taught a class in nearly a decade. Mason was holding the printed manuscript, 27 pages, carefully typed, meticulously formatted, every lemma checked, every assumption clean, and at the top, green, I. Professor Whitcomb read it in silence for almost 10 minutes. Then he looked up and asked flatly, "Who is Isabella Green?" Mason stood straighter. "She works here, on night shift, custodial team." Whitcomb's lips parted just slightly, not in shock, but disapproval. "You mean to tell me a custodian is claiming to have solved the Hale-Thompson conjecture?" "She's not claiming anything. I'm presenting it, and I've verified the proof. It holds." "I see." Whitcomb leaned back. "And where did she receive her doctoral training?" "She doesn't have one. She never finished undergrad." A pause, long and thin. "You understand how this reads, Mason. It reads like the truth." Whitcomb folded his hands. "It reads like a disruption to our process, our standards, our responsibility to the discipline." Mason felt the heat rise in his chest. "With respect, sir, if our process excludes a valid proof because of someone's job title, maybe it isn't a process worth defending." Whitcomb's eyes narrowed. "We are not here to make janitors into mathematicians." "No," Mason said. "We're here to recognize mathematics, wherever it lives." The meeting ended stiffly. The manuscript was under review. But it didn't take long for the whispers to begin. "She's not even in academia. It's plagiarism. Has to be. Probably something she copied from an old paper. Maybe she's just a front, Mason's pet project. Someone said, "You know what this'll look like if we let it through? That anyone off the street can just solve what we couldn't." Not one person said, "What if she's right?" Not one. Mason tried to stay calm. He wrote follow-up emails. He offered to walk through the proof step by step. No one replied. 3 days later, the department quietly scheduled a closed discussion on the matter. Mason was not invited. Neither was Isabella. When he told her, she wasn't surprised. She was sitting outside on a bench near the Harvard Square station, a scarf wrapped twice around her neck. It was early March, cold, wet. Mason sat beside her, empty-handed. "They won't even look at it," he said. She nodded. "It's all right." "No, it's not. I didn't write it for them." He turned to her, almost angry. Not at her, but for her. "You gave them something beautiful, and they're trying to bury it." She looked out at the passing students, their headphones and coffee cups, their printed theses and job offers. "I'm not what they expect," she said simply. He exhaled. "You're more than they expect." She turned to him then, eyes steady. "Promise me something." "Anything. If you ever present it, leave my name off." He froze. "What?" "I don't need it. I don't want it." "That's not right." It's enough to know the answer exists now, that someone saw it. He stood, agitated, ran a hand through his hair. "Isabella, I can't." She interrupted softly. "Please." And that was the thing about her. She never begged, even when asking to be erased. A week later, Mason submitted the paper to a lesser-known mathematics journal under his own name. Not because he wanted credit, but because he couldn't let the work die. He left the acknowledgement blank. And when the journal replied 2 weeks later, their decision was clear. "We cannot accept this submission due to concerns over the originality of the work and lack of appropriate institutional backing." They didn't even ask for clarification. They didn't ask who wrote it. They just closed the door. Mason resigned from his teaching position the following day. No speech, no protest, just a printed letter and a signed box. Harvard accepted it without comment. And Isabella? She kept working, kept cleaning floors, kept folding laundry, stretching food, smiling for her daughter. At night, she no longer wrote on the board. The camera had been removed. The chalk tray was empty. But she carried the notebook still filled its pages, still whispered formulas to herself on the train. Because truth isn't a position, it's a vow. And though her name had been left off every record, there was still one person who would not forget. And he was not done yet. It only takes one open pair of eyes to make the whole world see again. Harvard at 2 a.m. is not the Harvard in the brochures. The bells are silent. The tourists are long gone. The courtyards hold their breath, and the buildings sleep under the weight of centuries. But not everyone is asleep. On the 3rd floor of the mathematics building, light spills from a single classroom. Room G302. Inside, the blackboard stretches like a dark sea, silent, waiting. And a woman stands in front of it, one hand steady, the other curled around a piece of chalk. She isn't dressed like a professor. She isn't wearing a microphone. She isn't here to teach. But she is writing something that no one else in this building has written in 20 years. And just outside the door, through the small window, someone is watching. His name is Adam Kim, sophomore, applied mathematics, first generation. He came to Harvard with a full ride and the weight of two parents working double shifts in Sacramento. He's not a prodigy, but he works like one, because there's no safety net if he falls. On this particular night, Adam can't sleep. He's pacing the halls with his tablet and an open thermos, hunting for a quiet place to finish a problem set. When he sees the light in G302, he slows. He peers in and stops. At first, he doesn't quite understand what he's looking at. The woman has her back to him. She's writing fast, but fluid. No pauses, no references, no signs of struggle. The symbols are clean, familiar, but old school. Notations from a higher-level space. Functional analysis, maybe. He watches for a full minute before lifting his phone, and almost without thinking, he taps live. The video begins like this. Just a chalkboard. A woman in a plain coat. The sound of chalk tapping gently against slate. No voice, no introduction. But within 5 minutes, a handful of Adam's followers begin commenting. What is she writing? Where is this? Harvard? Wait. This is Banach's space theory? Who is she? Adam doesn't answer. He doesn't know. He's just watching. The way you watch something sacred. Like snowfall on a church rooftop. Within an hour, the clip has over 3,000 views. By morning, it has 300,000. By the end of the week, over 2 million. Comments pour in from every corner of the world. Mathematicians in Tokyo, Berlin, Cape Town, professors watching the playback frame by frame. One user writes, I studied under Thompson. That's his notation. But this goes further. Another. Is this a new direction for Hale's conjecture? Because it looks valid. Then, whoever she is, she's brilliant. This is the first original path I've seen since 2005. The internet does what the Academy would not. It listens. Journalists reach out. Forums light up. YouTubers begin posting breakdowns. The woman solving the impossible problem at Harvard. Reddit threads stretch hundreds of comments long. An anonymous user posts side-by-side comparisons of Hale's final lecture notes with the writing from the board. The match is undeniable. But more than that, the difference is undeniable. This isn't a copy. It's an answer. Isabella doesn't know. Not at first. She keeps working her shift, just as always, cleaning the coffee stains, wiping fingerprints, folding chairs and bagging trash. Until one afternoon, while picking up Emily from school, a girl points at her and says, "You're the math lady." Emily turns, and for the first time, Isabella learns what the world has seen. That night, her inbox is full. Messages from strangers, from scholars, from people who say, "I cried watching you write." She doesn't reply. Not because she's ungrateful, but because she doesn't know how to be seen. And then comes the email from Dr. Miriam El-Sayed, a mathematician at ETH Zurich. Dear Ms. Green, we have reviewed the logic of your Blackboard proof from the G302 live stream. I want you to know, you did it. You closed the conjecture. You made something complete. With deep respect, M.E. Isabella reads it twice, then again, then sets the phone down and weeps quietly at the kitchen table while water boils for tea. Mason calls the next morning. He's already seen the video, seen the reactions, seen the joy. I told you, he says, voice quiet. She says nothing at first. Then, they're being kind, but they'll move on. Maybe, but not all of them. Not the ones who understand. He pauses. And you? I'm still cleaning tonight. But the next time she enters G302, something is different. A small group of students sits silently in the back row. No phones, just eyes, watching the way her hand holds the chalk. Not like a weapon, not like a tool, but like a candle in the dark. It wasn't that they didn't believe she did it. It's that they couldn't bear that she did. The paper was published quietly. No fanfare, no press release. Just a line in the May issue of the Journal of Advanced Mathematical Structures on the weak continuity of linear mappings in non-separable Banach spaces. Clark, M. No second author. No acknowledgments. No mention of the woman who wrote most of it by hand, in the quietest hours of the night, after wiping coffee rings from the same floor. Her name, Isabella Green, was gone. Mason saw the final draft the morning it went live. He read it 3 times, not for errors, for absence. And when he saw the line where her name should have stood, he felt his throat close. There was a weight to that blank space. He knew it hadn't been an oversight. It was a decision. He called the editor, a soft-spoken man in Belgium, known more for bureaucracy than insight. "Dr. Clark," the editor said, "we had to make adjustments. Institutional policy. The peer reviewers had concerns about authorship legitimacy." She wrote the proof. "I understand, but with no formal affiliation, no academic record, she didn't need one." "There are standards." "No," Mason said, voice low. "There are fears." Silence. Then the call dropped. Mason drafted a letter of protest. He printed copies, walked the halls, handed them to anyone who would take one. Few read it. Some patted his shoulder. Some smiled awkwardly. Some avoided his eyes entirely. The ones who mattered already had tenure. The ones who cared had no power. And Harvard? Harvard stayed silent. He found Isabella in the staff locker room that night, folding her cleaning apron. She didn't look up when he entered. He held out the print copy of the journal. "I'm sorry," he said. She took it gently, glanced at the cover, then the title. She smiled, faint, but real. "You published it," she said softly. "They erased you." She nodded. "I knew they might." "You deserve better." "I didn't do it for credit." "I know," he said. "But you still deserve it." She set the journal down, looked up at him for the first time that day. "Mason," she said, "they can take my name off a paper, but they can't take the proof out of the world." Across the ocean, the world was not staying quiet. Someone had posted screenshots from Adam Kim's live stream, chalkboard comparisons, step-by-step breakdowns, clips of Isabella's hand writing the exact logic now printed under someone else's name. Then came a story in The Atlantic. It ran with the headline, "She solved what they couldn't, and they tried to erase her name." It traced the footage, interviewed Adam, quoted the letter from ETH Zurich, described how a night custodian at Harvard had completed a 20-year-old problem only to vanish from the academic record like a ghost. The article went viral. But it wasn't sensational. It was clear. It was calm. It was true. Comments flooded in from every corner of the world. "This is why we lose genius. Academia needs a reckoning. Her name is Isabella Green. Say it." And someone did. On a rainy Tuesday, a group of undergraduates chalked her name in giant white letters across the front steps of the mathematics building. Isabella Green solved it. By the next morning, photos had reached every math department in America. An anonymous professor in Sweden uploaded an annotated PDF of the published paper, every section highlighted with the note, "Written by Green." A retired mathematician from Argentina mailed her a handwritten letter that ended, "The world saw you. The world knows." But Isabella? She kept showing up to work, kept folding towels, emptying trash, checking clocks. She wasn't angry, but she wasn't broken either, because something had changed, and not just in headlines. Students nodded when they passed her. A few whispered, "Thank you." She never corrected them, just smiled, and kept walking. Her name didn't appear in the next issue. No apology, no footnote. But there was one thing they couldn't erase. The proof, still standing, still solid, still hers. Some names don't belong in footnotes. They belong in hearts. They didn't call it an apology. Harvard rarely does. They called it a public mathematics forum, an open celebration of overlooked contributions to theoretical research. The flyers went up on a Tuesday. The announcement read, featuring special remarks by Isabella Green. No title, no degrees, no photo, just a name. Finally. And this time, it stayed. Mason called her the night before. He asked if she was ready. She said, "No," then added, "But I'll go anyway." The lecture hall had never looked so full. Not with students, but faculty, researchers, journalists, retired professors in wool coats and scarred leather shoes, foreign mathematicians flown in from Zurich, Mumbai, Cape Town. Even Adam Kim, the sophomore who filmed it all, sat in the front row, holding a notebook like it was sacred. And at the back of the hall, Emily. Now 17, straight-backed, silent, watching. There was no music, no introduction, just a single door opening, and Isabella Green stepping forward. She didn't wear anything fancy, just a clean blouse and the same coat she wore on night shift, patched at the elbows but pressed. She walked slowly, hands folded, eyes down. When she reached the podium, she paused. The room was still. She looked out over the crowd. Her voice was soft, just loud enough. "I'm not a professor," she began. "I'm not even a graduate. I don't have a degree or a CV or a research fellowship. What I had was time, a mop, and a question that wouldn't let go of me." A small ripple of laughter, gentle, respectful. She smiled, just barely. "I used to clean this room," she continued, "every night. After the lights were off and the students were gone, the board was full of chalk and I would wipe it clean. But one night, I didn't." She turned slightly, looking at the chalkboard behind her. Blank, waiting. There was a problem. A line of logic, left behind like a door half open, and I remembered what it felt like to want to know. She paused. I wrote a line, then another, not because I thought anyone would care. I did it because I still cared. She turned back to the audience. "You can leave school. You can leave your books. But if you love an idea deeply enough, it will wait for you." A hush filled the room, as if even the walls were listening. "I don't want credit," she said softly. "I don't want titles. I just want young people to know. Brilliance doesn't always arrive with a scholarship. It sometimes comes with silence, with patience, with work done alone after hours." Her voice grew steadier. "I am not standing here because I fought for recognition. I'm standing here because someone finally listened." She looked toward Mason. He looked down, blinking hard. Then she looked at Emily and smiled. She ended like this. "I didn't write that proof to prove myself. I wrote it because I believed the world still deserved to know the answer." The audience stood before she even stepped back. Not out of politeness, but because they had witnessed something rare, a soul with nothing to sell, offering everything. Tears on cheeks, hands over hearts, people clapping not for achievement, but for truth, made visible. Behind her on the screen, a single slide appeared. It read, The Green-Hale Theorem, published March 2025. Originated February 2, 2005. Completed February 8, 2025. Isabella Green. When the applause faded, she stepped down. Mason met her in the aisle. She didn't say anything, just nodded once, the way you nod at someone who helped carry you across a river. And beside them, Emily whispered, "Mom, you didn't need a title. You were always the teacher." That night, the math building stayed lit longer than usual. Some said they saw students writing on the chalkboard long after midnight. Others swore they saw a janitor's cart, still parked outside room G302, as if someone had just stepped away. But those who looked closely knew. She wasn't gone. She was everywhere now. In every quiet mind that stayed up late, chasing an idea. In every unseen soul that refused to give up. In every girl staring at a chalkboard, not because she was allowed to, but because she belonged there. Not everyone has their name printed on a book cover, but everyone has a story worth being heard. I wrote this story for those who were never called genius, not because they weren't, but because no one ever paused long enough to see. I wrote it for the single mother cleaning after midnight, for the farm kid studying by lamplight, for the quiet worker who still remembers a half-solved equation from long ago. Isabella Green is fiction, but thousands like her are real. They may be cleaning university halls, delivering food, washing dishes. They may not have degrees. They may not have titles, but they have intelligence. They have patience. And they carry a silent love for what is true, for knowledge itself. And sometimes, like a quiet tragedy, the world only notices them when they've been erased from the page. This story isn't about triumph, it's about worth, about being seen, just once, and about the courage to see yourself, even when no one else looks your way. If you've ever felt like you were too late, if you left school halfway, if you let go of a dream, I want you to know, nothing was wasted. The love you once had for learning, it never dies. It waits. Like a blackboard waits for chalk. Like an unfinished question waits for someone to return. To the readers who made it to the final page, thank you for walking this path. Especially to the elders, to the grandfathers, the grandmothers, who once crossed fields, wars, poverty, and still kept the ember of curiosity alive. This story is for you. To every janitor, kitchen worker, night guard, and invisible caretaker who keeps learning possible, thank you. Without you, there would be no classrooms. To every teacher who once paused by the desk of a quiet child, looked them in the eye and said, "You can do this." Thank you. And most of all, to anyone who ever stood before a blackboard, even once, and thought, "I still want to understand." Thank you. Thank you for still loving what is true. The author,